problem. It's you're right. The league does not sleep this week, that's for sure.
It doesn't sleep. I mean, the Eagles won less than 3 weeks ago, and we're already talking about Myles Garrett because of what you said on the network yesterday. So how real could this be, Jeremy? How aggressive could the Eagles actually be to try to land a premier edge rusher and to try to keep him away from other teams around the Eagles division?
Yeah, that one was interesting. That one took a life of its own. I mean, really, I was just laying out the situation in some dominoes. It wasn't meant to be a splash report or anything, but I do expect that Josh Sweat will move on. I get that sense here. And they'll need an edge rusher. Bryce Huff, they'll probably have to admit that wrong at some point. Maybe they try to trade him or move on. So that leaves a void. We know Howie Roseman's very aggressive. We know some pass rushers are going to be available via trade. We know it's not an overly dominant pass rush market in free agency, so there could be some trade movement. Myles would be that top guy. And, I think Washington, for as much as people assume they need receiver help, which they probably do, I think they'll build more in the trenches, which could lead them to a guy like Garrett potentially. And if that were to happen, I could see Howie jumping in there and trying to make that interesting. So that's kind of how I was laying it out, more connecting dots and just my institutional knowledge on that market.
I know how you work a room, and I know the amount of people that you talk to. So I would ask, the perception right now of the Philadelphia Eagles sitting there as world champions, what is it when you talk to people and their name comes up?
Right now, it's probably that they have the best roster in the league and that they can keep this thing going. Like, how are they going to sustain it, What moves are they going to make to sort of capitalize on the primes they have of their top players? Roseman pointed out yesterday in his press conference, like they have a lot of their key guys in their window of age that is prominent, in those mid to late 20s. They have a lot of big cap hits on those players, but they've been able to maneuver that in the past where it's not a major issue, So how do they sort of brace for the power drain that they're going to lose a little bit with some of these free agents leaving, some key players that they're inevitably going to have to lose? How do they backfill it and replace it to the point where, they stay dominant, particularly up front? That's really where it always starts with them, and that showed in the Super Bowl. And I don't know. There's a feeling that they could have a run here, with the Chiefs being vulnerable. There's not a clear-cut 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the league at the moment. There are some good teams. The Rams were probably the team that played the Eagles the best in the playoffs, and then here they are sitting with the Matthew Stafford situation. So
to all
no, go ahead.
All that being said, and it's hard to say forget Myles Garrett for a second, but do you believe the Eagles, because they do have a core intact already and obviously a pricey core, would they continue to look to be aggressive, get another splash like a Myles Garrett or another big-name free agent, or do they continue to build through the draft? Because to get Garrett, you also have to give up those draft picks, which they have used very well over the last couple of years.
Right. It would have to be within reason. That's the problem. I don't get the sense that the Eagles want to part with a lot of draft capital as aggressively as they have in the past, in part because they draft well, in part because, they're not sitting here with 12 picks this year, I don't know what their numbers are in the past, but I feel like they had been able to maneuver to where they maybe had some more capital in the past. So that's a factor. Certainly, you might have to get creative, but even with a player like Myles Garrett, for example, he's made clear he wants to win, right? So would he make concessions on a contract to go to a place like Philly? Like, those are some conversations that could be had where maybe they could take advantage. I'm certainly not suggesting that Myles Garrett, who's the best pass rusher in the league, takes a massive pay cut, but you know what I mean? Like, there's some avenues that the team could at least explore based on the cachet they now have as world champions. Like, that can help you in a lot of areas.
Jeremy, I'm going to need you to go up to Sean McDermott and Raheem Morris and some others and just tell them they're a bunch of whiny babies for me. Just say it's from me. Like you don't have to take ownership of it. Say a guy in Philly's calling you names. I can't get over this tush push discussion and how it's become the last few days.
Well, it's interesting. It's definitely taken some traction here. Rarely do you have this many coaches and players in one spot. Usually this is a topic for the owners' meetings in March. I'm kind of surprised it's taken over here. But it's been years of teams not being able to stop it. We talked about this at length on Get Up yesterday. It's fascinating. I can see both sides of it. I don't necessarily have a passionate argument one way or the other. But, a lot of the offensive players are like, hey, we've been able to do this for 20 years, and a lot of times the quarterback's not even really being pushed from the back. Like in the Eagles' case, they just have a dominant line up front where they're able to make it happen, and other teams can't do it, but they're upset. The flip side, I guess, would be that it's just simply a boring play right now. And I know the league takes two things seriously: injury prevention and excitement. And if there's a lack of excitement or it's an injury play, they're going to look into changing it. Now, I don't know that the data suggests that there's a big injury issue with that play, but the excitement part could be a factor.
Well, when it comes to the injury factor, right, and again, there's not much documented to it, Sean McDermott says that there's always been an injury risk, which is why he would like it out of the league. However, the Buffalo Bills have ran the tush push the second most times in the NFL. So to me, that's hypocritical. And if I'm somebody from the league office that has to make the decision, if a guy is talking about injury concerns and yet he runs it more than every other team except for the Eagles, that goes out the window for me.
Well, certainly that could be a factor, but I don't think I would imagine the numbers are there's a pretty big gap between 1 and 2, right? I mean, the Eagles run it way more than everybody else, I would say. But, the Bills have Josh Allen, right? So they can run that play and get away with it. There's really a variance around the league on how people feel about it. I know some really don't care and are on the side of Philadelphia and are sort of like, hey, you got to stop it and you got to learn to do it. But it's become, I don't think it's ever been used this much and this frequently and this successfully that people are trying to come to grips with it.
When you talk about the window of opportunity for the Eagles in the NFC, is a lot of that based on the fact that Dallas and the Giants are probably going to be a bit down for a little bit, and maybe Detroit with new coordinators and everything, that maybe there isn't some behemoth ready to knock them off?
You're saying in relation to the tush push?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about just the Eagles and where they are in the NFC and the challenge that they've got in the NFC.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I mean, really, you have Washington knocking on the door, but the Giants and Cowboys are clearly down. I don't know that people are intimidated by the Eagles necessarily, but there's a feeling of, okay, you're going to have to be aggressive in improving your roster if you want to hang here in December and January. I mean, that was proven last year with Dallas's inaction and Philly's aggressiveness, and it worked out. Now, Philly hit a stride where they were batting nearly 1,000 on some of the moves they made. That is pretty rare. I mean, even the best front offices are going to have a hard time replicating that every year. So they kind of hit a hot streak, and that helped them win a title. So I don't know if they can pull that off again, or maybe they don't need to because they have done a lot of the moves and everything's in place. But, you got a guy like Zach Bond you're going to have to try to re-sign who could do pretty well in the open market based on how he played. You're going to lose some defensive linemen here, Milton Williams probably, Josh Sweat probably. So there's still a lot to do. I don't know how much Dallas is really trying to be aggressive and compete in that way. I think they're just trying to make their moves and sign Micah Parsons and roll the ball out and play. So, that will be – it's a different philosophy over there compared to what they're doing in Philadelphia.
You mentioned
selectively aggressive.
Sure.
You mentioned Bryce Huff earlier. What is the likelihood that the Eagles do move on from him? And what would that market even be? I mean, the guy didn't even dress in the Super Bowl. I can't imagine the Eagles are getting a big haul, especially with the contract that's attached to him.
No, they'd have to get creative. I'd imagine they'd have to either eat the salary or even take on a draft pick. I don't know. There's not much of a market, no. I think a team like Atlanta could get involved, but they need a pass rusher, and maybe they like the upside of him as a situational rusher. So there could be somebody out there because there's still, if you have a role for him, clearly Vic Fangio wasn't a fan of Bryce Huff. I mean, if he was, then he would have played.
Right.
So, maybe you can go to a team where they're just asking you to rush on third down as a stand-up rusher. Maybe that works for him. You can go somewhere where you're comfortable and go from there, So, but it would have to be low cost for that team. There's no doubt.
Jeremy, thanks for coming on. We know how busy you are right